What are you doing? What are you doing? You're too old to be gaming. Grow the hell up. Because I grew up with like the first full generation that grew up with gaming from the beginning, you always got resistance to it. You always were looked down upon. I was the first generation, basically, that grew up with gaming from birth. It was looked down upon because it was something new and it wasn't deemed socially acceptable. It was you were in two categories if you gamed, and it was either you were a kid, young, or you were a creepy adult that you probably, if you were one of those creepy adults, parents wanted to keep their kids away from you. There was no in between. That's literally how it was deemed. It was either for children or for adults that were probably people that you didn't want to engage with. It's sad that it was that way, but that's how human beings are. When there's a new emerging technology or a new emerging genre, it's different. Oh my God, we have to look at it with skepticism because human beings, like every other animal, are creatures of habit and they don't like change. Some of them to this day that I know, I won't name any names, are the same people that will exist during football season for the sake of football. I'm like, because that's a much better thing to invest your time in. Great job there. Much better. Look, I'm not talking down to anybody who loves football, but my point being is a hobby is a hobby. There's things that you enjoy in life, and yeah, they could be considered time wasters, but what are we, ants in an ant farm? Like, are we just existing to work and not enjoy ourselves?
I said in a recent, totally unrelated video that the way we explain things to others can be very important because with the passage of time, it comes to be the way we explain things to ourselves. You might say the excuses we make to others publicly starts to become our private, innermost, personal philosophy. The selection of examples that our reasoning relies upon often betrays a great deal about our own motivations, the limits of our own sincerity and our own rationality. When I have debated with people who were openly racist, like on the internet, I'm on the anti-racist side, and they're on the pro-racist side, I noticed that they would cling to very particular self-serving examples defined in a very particular way. So they would have something to say about the contrast between African Americans and white Americans and the city of Chicago and IQ tests or something like that. And I would be able to not just challenge them, but completely overturn their worldview and demolish their argument, not even by criticizing their position, not even by disagreeing with it, but just by shifting to a different set of examples. Like, okay, so why don't we apply what you've just said to me to Cambodians and Vietnamese people, people in Thailand and people in Laos. Let's just talk about some other examples of contrasting ethnic groups, and let's think through the implications of what it is you claim. And just by changing the examples they'd selected and switching to a set of examples that they had some emotional detachment from, like they're super emotionally attached to the conflict between white people and black people within the United States of America, and they start thinking about different ethnic groups that have their own history of racism, have their own history of conquering and enslaving one another, by the way, too. Their own history of slavery and the abolition of slavery. And suddenly, none of those excuses seem to make sense anymore. When I've talked to people who were right-wing libertarians, they'd be so attached to some particular example, like they'd have such faith that if you could just abolish the postal service, private companies like Federal Express would do a better job than the U.S. Postal Service as part of their right-wing libertarian political and economic philosophy. And you just change the example. Say, oh, that's okay, so that's your theory. Now, how does that apply to sewage treatment plants? You think the Coca-Cola company is going to operate sewage treatment plants at a profit? Is that what's going to... Just challenging them by switching to a different set of examples, their philosophy would fall apart. It would become ridiculous. what this guy is doing here, what he's deeply committed to, and what he lacks any sense of emotional attachment over, shows in the selection of examples. What does he say to you? Well, on the one hand, there's playing video games, which he admits is a waste of time. And then there's American football, watching football on TV, watching sports on TV, and playing fantasy football. Also a waste of time. And then the only other possibility we're presented with is, well, what do you think? Do you think life on Earth, do you think we're supposed to be a soulless race of worker ants? Do you suppose we're supposed to just devote all of our time to meaningless drudgery, to labor without end? Those are the examples he chooses. Those are the only alternatives he presents you with in questioning your own life, what you're doing with your own limited time on this planet.
Both things technically are waste of time, but you pick up a video game, you're a weirdo. You play pretend, but because it's football and it's considered something socially acceptable, it's okay.
The other major recurring leitmotif in his presentation is that you shouldn't give in to peer pressure. You shouldn't respond to what society tells you. And really, he fleshes it out with examples. You shouldn't care about what other people tell you, just other particular people in your life, the other people you know in your family from high school, your work colleagues, whoever it is you know face to face. Rarely do people interact with society. For the most part, these are dialogues with unique individuals. And tell me something. How else are you going to learn about opportunities and alternatives that are out there if you're not willing to listen? What if there really is a better life to be had than sitting in your apartment alone playing video games? What if there is something better for you to do with your time than watching football on television? What if there's something much more meaningful you could do with those hours that would motivate you and reward you so much, and you just don't know about it yet? You just haven't considered it yet.
For a long time, I really didn't game. Then I remember going to get Dead Rising, and then I played, the first time I ever played Fear, even though the best way to play it now is obviously on PC, but the first time I played Fear, the first-person shooter, was on 360. I'm like, this is amazing. And I remember playing Condemned Criminal Origins. They had all these dark action games that were so up my alley, and I'm like, you know what, man? Why did I deny myself this? This is absolutely amazing. All of these games are great, and gaming is a hobby that I truly enjoy. It's my passion for tech and gaming that inspired me to do this. And if it was me just listening to society to tell me, oh, you're too old to play video games and you're too, that's for children, and I did for many times. I denied myself that and tried to fit into societal norms. And it was the best choice I ever made was saying, screw everybody, I'm going to start gaming again. My point being is, if there's anyone here who's my age and you denied yourself gaming, or if you're younger and maybe you're getting flack because you game, don't listen to it, man. If you're socially healthy, physically healthy, and you're a productive member of society, don't let anyone dictate what your hobbies are. Don't let anyone tell you what you can and cannot do to enjoy your life.
I'm divorced. My first wife, her whole life changed because of a casual conversation she had with somebody in a coffee shop. And she was at a point in her life where she wanted to do something more meaningful. She wasn't sure what it was. She wanted a new direction. And she had this conversation with a guy where she described what her interests were, and also, I think, what her kind of criticism of the university system was, what she didn't want to do in university. And he said to her, well, have you thought about anthropology? It sounds like this is perfect, a perfect match for you. You could go into anthropology. Long story short, she eventually got a PhD in anthropology from Cambridge University, from an elite university. Right? I can't say she had never heard of anthropology before. Most of us have heard the word. We're aware that there is a noun in the English language, anthropology. But she had never thought about anthropology as a career option for her, as a topic for her to study at university, as something she could do with the rest of it. Why would you? Did your parents or grandparents say to you, hey, have you considered becoming an anthropologist? All right. My whole life changed because I decided to move to Cambodia and study the Cambodian language and do humanitarian work. Nobody in my family ever told me anything about Cambodia. They could have, actually, knowing my parents and knowing who some of my brothers and sisters are. It's possible, but none of them ever had a single conversation with me about Cambodia. I saw the word Cambodia for the first time in a comic book. I can remember the comic book, and for the first time I asked my father about this war and the morality and history surrounding what was this odium surrounding Cambodia, and it stuck in my mind. That was before Google. That was before Wikipedia. I was a little kid. I didn't look it up in an encyclopedia, but it stuck in my mind as an interest. And eventually, years later, I got interested in Laos and Cambodia, this other side to the history of the Vietnam War and the American and Canadian involvement in it. I was open to the possibility of taking on a new direction, doing something better, something different with my life. How would I know about that? How would I? And this idea that any kind of social pressure is going to be negative. If people tell you to stop wasting your time playing video games, then you should just fight against that. You should just be committed to enjoying yourself, right? But it's not really conceivable to you yet just how rewarding it might be for you to get a PhD in anthropology, for you to study the Cambodian language, for you to do anything that is orders of magnitude more meaningful and more rewarding than playing video games, watching football on TV, or endless, meaningless drudgery like being an ant in a terrarium.
I worked to save up money to buy a Sega Dreamcast, and I did. And I bought that. I bought Sonic Adventure with it, and I got Soul Calibur, and I was in love with that for a while. I was absolutely in love with that. I remember playing that basically every day when I got home from school. But again, I remember focusing on other things like wanting to stay at school, trying to get girls, doing things, going out during the weekends and stuff like that. And again, my Dreamcast, I kind of hid it away. Yeah, that's not the cool thing to do, Rich. Remember that. It was just I was fighting back the fact that I wanted to play video games because I was trying to be socially accepted by a bunch of other jackasses that had no bearing on my life.
Am I a loser for playing video games? I went into GameStop. I was running a whole bunch of errands. I was like, you know what? I'm passing by GameStop. There was a dude in front of me. And he embodied the stereotypical nerd gamer. And I'm not even talking about appearance, because let's keep it real. I have no room to talk, okay? It's not that I'm a Greek Adonis with washboard abs. I'm a fat dude with man tits. But it wasn't even about the appearance. It was about his persona. He was like, hey, sir, how are you doing today? I was really excited to pick up some Pokemon cards. And I was looking at him and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, that's how people outside of this community look at me. And I'm looking at him and I start getting real fucking uncomfortable, man, because this is where I'm going to start tying into more of what Rev was talking about. Because I'm also, he just turned 35. I just turned 35 and I have a kid coming. My kid's going to be here. My fiance's pregnant and we're expecting a son. But I'm looking at this guy. I'm like, I'm 35. Do people look at me like him?
All of these things come at a cost. In economic parlance, what we're dealing with here is opportunity cost. I regret going to Cambodia. I regret studying the Cambodian language. It was the wrong choice. She'll never talk to me again, but I really wonder if at this stage my ex-wife also would say that she regrets getting a PhD in anthropology. Long story short, it didn't work out for her. There's plenty of room for personal growth here. There's plenty of room for regret also. And you know what? My father had 9 kids. 2 of them had already been to Cambodia before me, 2 of my older brothers. And I remember the conversations I had with them about it. They went to Cambodia in a really shallow way. They basically went there as tourists. And they both responded very differently to me saying that I have this clear sense of purpose. Look, I'm going to Cambodia, and I'm not just going as a tourist. But sure, there was an opportunity, even just within my own family, for me to have gone into that situation better informed. Either of my brothers, they could have helped. Nobody in my family helped. I was all alone. I went to Cambodia with my money in the bottom of my boots. Back then, getting robbed on the road was a big problem. I had the money on the between my socks and the sole of my shoes as I entered the country. My Cambodian dictionary on paper, no cell phone, no credit card, no lifeline. I went there alone to start a new life, and it didn't work out. And what I was hoping for there, what I was looking for there, the life I wanted to have there, it wasn't there to be found. I was disappointed, and I learned a great deal from disappointment. But there was something else I could have done with those years of my life, with that time, with that energy, and yes, even that money, and I'll never know. I could have gone to Egypt, right? Same thing for my ex-wife, right? It's not so much that anthropology is the worst thing in the world. It's not for me that going to Cambodia was the worst thing in the world, but there was something else she could have done. There was something else I could have done, right? At that juncture in her life, she could have studied anything. She could have done anything with her career. And she did this one thing to the exclusion of all else. And now she's left to wonder what else she could have done, what might have been a better choice. So the decisions we do make are in this way, always in the shadow of this kind of unknown exchange, right? The opportunity cost. What this guy doesn't realize, Rich from ReviewTechUSA, who amazingly is 3 years younger than I am. He looks 20 years older than I am. When you bought that Dreamcast, Rich, look up what the price was for buying a Dreamcast at launch, the Dreamcast and the games, and adjust for inflation. Rich, you could have bought yourself an airplane ticket to Egypt. You could have gone to Cambodia. You could have gone to all kinds of places. All right. If you had gone just to see the pyramids in Egypt, if you'd started taking a correspondence course to learn to speak Arabic in the Egyptian dialect, if you'd just gotten a little bit interested in the ancient history, maybe of Greece and Rome and the Egyptian pyramids, I'm not going to say to you that it's the most meaningful thing in your life. Going to Cambodia wasn't the most meaningful thing for me either, okay? But compared to the time and money and energy you put into that Sega Dreamcast, there is an opportunity cost. There are so many more meaningful things you could have done that would have changed you, that would have resulted in you being a better person today. And the saddest fact of all is, you can't even imagine what they are. Because as you've said yourself, from the cradle to the grave, you're someone who's played video games from your earliest childhood. And it has narrowed your imagination about what this world is, what your place in it is, what difference you can make, and who you can become. Maybe we can practice doing puppetry together.
Yes, that's all I needed. I need it all.